Colors of India, Meherabad Retreat Center, Meherabad, India. In an inestimable feast of color, I look out the window of my retreat room as the purple of a woman's sari and lemon of another goes by. Orange calla lilies grace the garden in Meherabad, while roseate flowers mesh with fuchsia, peeking through white bougainvillea on a tree of orange bark. This overwhelming parade of color fills my eyes at my writing desk from dawn to dusk east of Mumbai at the Meherabad Retreat Center near Ahmednagar, India. How did I get here after only a few short years when introduced to this new spiritual world of Meher Baba? Here are your sandals for when you go to India. Buffy, a devotee I barely knew, thrust a pair of white open-toed shoes at me at Baba's home in the West, the Meherabad Retreat Center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. 2 years after my introduction to Baba in Glastonbury, I stood with my mouth open in a kitchen area there, feeling already like a newbie among all the followers. This first trip to the retreat center in Myrtle Beach from California had been enough of a challenge, and going to India halfway around the world seemed impossible. I'm never going to India, I said flatly. It's too far away. Its population is huge. I don't know how I can handle the poverty, and every friend who has ever been there speaks of its chaos. Already sensing I was as close to heaven on earth as I could be in Myrtle Beach by the ocean near a glowing lake and miles of pristine white dunes, I had no need to go further. I thanked Buffy and shoved the shoes in the suitcase, rarely thinking of them again. A few days later, in another kitchen where people gathered, a blonde woman came over to me and whispered, "There's a scholarship for people to go to India, given by a woman in honor of her husband who died a few years ago. Not many know about this, as she doesn't want it to be too public, but here's her name on a dress." On a whim, I spontaneously sent the potential donor some of my poetry. She replied that my name could be put on a list for going to India, but there were many before me. That was fine. It mirrored my own ambivalence. But then 3 years later, Patricia, my Meher Baba mentor from Glastonbury, England, announced she was returning to India and who would like to go with her. Another carrot. If I were to ever go, it would be holding on to the coattails of one who knew India and was well-traveled there. And she wanted to go for 3 weeks in November, when the weather was best and fewer people would be there. Those were my preferences as well. My life had already opened up to other unforeseen rich journeys, among them going to England, teaching and having a book published there were special cornerstones. Did I need more growth in consciousness? The scholarship covered airfare only, so traveling to India continued to be a remote possibility anyway, and I sighed a breath of relief. But just then another windfall occurred. Only a month before the trip, a UCLA staff person told me there was a small amount of funds owed to me retroactively that would soon be made available. I called the donor. "This is surprising," she exclaimed. "You're at the top of the list." Checking again that this was definite with others before dropping out unexpectedly, she said, "Yes, you're at the top." Nervous and excited, I heard her say, "But if you go, there is one condition." Ah, finally the catch. I knew it. "To maximize your experience," she said, "you can only go there and must return home right away. No other travel in India." Not believing this was even possibly happening, I didn't have a desire to explore anywhere else in India anyway. There would be so much to process upon return from an amazing 3 weeks there. Why would I want to go anywhere else? Imagining the quiet retreat atmosphere would take me deeper into the spiritual realm I was already comfortable with since I'd practiced meditation for years. Being there would be a deeply healing 3 weeks. I was also drawn to experience Meher Baba's final home and resting place, the Samadhi, a tall white marble monument similar to others found in India, with a blue cupola that overpowered the landscape. Inside were also memorable paintings of Meher Baba's journey from the 1920s to the 1960s that he commissioned by a special artist on all the walls above the tomb were seen. So, on October 29, 2010, I bit the bullet and boarded a plane from LAX to Heathrow, where I met Patricia Caswell, and we flew on to Mumbai. One last story I pondered on the flight was about a Western woman who'd arrived there, got off the plane, took one look around, and climbed back on, never to return. I was hoping I wouldn't be like her with the same reaction, but as I became enthralled crossing the Black Sea, Turkey, and other countries I'd never seen before, the shape of Afghanistan far away out the plane window, I lost all trepidation. Instead of the poverty and chaos I'd heard about, now every day I was regaled with this inestimable feast of color and dignity of the Gujarati and Marathi women in their ongoing parade of aqua, orange, and white-flowered saris, as they carried blue buckets and bamboo stalks in their hands and reverently swept the arches in the ceiling. They seemed in a rhythmic dance of beauty. Entranced as I was with this feast of color surrounding me, in contrast, I wore mostly white, akin to many spiritual followers, both Indians and non-Indians throughout India. That wasn't a conscious decision, but just because I was drawn to it. At a large area on the retreat's land, there were also crafts and cooperatives opened by women who spoke with excited purpose about helping to change India's economy and bolstering other women's efforts in similar ventures around the country. In the long meadows leading to the other side of the retreat and the samadhi, every day a soporific silver mist hung in the yellow range grass. Going to the top of the stairs on the upper level of my building in the early mornings, I heard a woman's voice, clear and distinct, singing a Hindi bhajan from the nearby ancient village of Aragon. Those earliest hours in the morning also brought a man's voice after hers, who called to devotees through prayer in the Muslim tradition, both religions, practices side by side. I witnessed the same side-by-side interaction between women and men wherever I went, whether standing together waiting at a bus or train stations, in tandem on motorbikes, or working together in offices and hotels. Women managers at the Meher Center also held leadership positions in financial, spiritual, and culinary areas. Once, when a younger woman with dark braids and a pink sari momentarily filled the window as she pushed the soft broom into crevices in the ceiling above, I remembered the bright flashes of color of saris and huge crowds of Mumbai's worst traffic as our driver navigated through tumultuous intersections. All around us, the saris on the women somehow looked surprisingly clean and artfully wrapped. Even if one was sitting on the ground cooking in a pot, the cloth fitted expertly around her body. Little girls with big dark glasses and fitted caps often sat next to the handlebars in front of their parents on zooming motorcycles, and I watched how a 2-year-old girl in purple velvet at Meherabad's Samadhi tomb put a flower on each of the female devotees' tombs and bowed as if she knew, her black eyes brilliant in her purple shift, exactly what to do. Watching them and the baby girl in white Chanel and the Diwali festivities honoring Krishna, India's Christmas, crawl amongst Sunday celebrators towards the musicians at the retreat center, I felt the strength and future presence of women in India, symbolically fueled by this strong vibration of color everywhere that reflected this inner resolve, one sense that women wearing these colors could indeed bring about desperately needed change in the economic and social growth of their country. The booming industries of cooperative directed by women, the influence of popular female gurus, Amma, Mother Mira, and the mother of Oroville, joined with a powerful woman president and 2 women prime ministers throughout the years in government, have made significant inroads that are tipping the scale. Government officials have declared that women are playing a pioneering role in establishing new milestones for India's economy, and that if India is to progress and reach new heights, it can only be possible when women walk shoulder to shoulder politically with men, and social stigmas and restrictions must be lifted. India's women are leading a new era of entrepreneurship, innovation, and social impact, stated an insight report from Impact Alpha, an investment and financial news bureau providing daily news and actionable intelligence for the future. In an article from the News Bureau, it asserted that it is accepted truth that the rising social and economic power of women in India is a global megatrend bigger than the rise of China and India in the last 2 decades. Traveling through miles and miles of slums in Mumbai on the way back to the airport, I suddenly saw one brave flag of red, bright red, far away on a balcony in one of the many beige high-rises stacked together. It changed the entire energy of its surrounding environment, and in a heartbeat, I understood a major reason why I'd had to make the journey. Like color, the great equalizer that adorns India in such richness, even in pandemonium, I believe the strength and ingenuity of Indian women and their leadership will change conditions critical in the world, along with other women in distant countries. As I had witnessed this firsthand, I knew it to be true. That's it. So, going on faith, the pilgrimage home. Humans, even nomadic ones, need a sense of home. Home need not be one place or any place at all, but every home has 2 essential elements: a sense of community, and even more important, a history. From Bliss by Eric Weiner. I found home when I was just 20 years old in Boston. It was then I saw Meherabad's portrait unknowingly for the first time. Following a boyfriend from the Department of State in Washington, D.C. in 1967 to live in Boston, I spent hours in Cambridge Square writing about where was home. Crisscrossing the world many times in the Navy family, I lived out an intriguing but unsettling pattern of exploring new geographies and cultures. Eventually, I would write about them in the context of the spirit of place. It was the era when coffee houses thrived and music poured out on the streets from every corner, Maria Muldaur's Midnight at the Oasis exuding from one cafe in Cambridge, while the Kingston Trio, riding through the streets of Boston, never to return, came from another. Then one day, as I stepped over ice and snow on the threshold of an apartment between Harvard and MIT on Commonwealth Avenue, I passed the portrait of Meherabad on an altar that would one day launch a firestorm in my life. Who was he, this man with dark hair, oval face, penetrating black eyes, and a large mustache? Taking one glimpse, I passed quickly by. It never occurred to me that I might have met my destiny. Dressed in a white sadra, a garland of blossoms around his neck with a compassionate presence, his famous quote, "Don't worry, be happy," shortened from "do your best, then don't worry, be happy," was below the picture. It was 2 years before he would drop his body, a term used by his followers to explain that this was the time when he was casting the last net over those connected to him on the planet. In contrast to the bitter cold outside, here was the beginning of a tremendous spiritual awakening, but it was not until 38 years later it would come to light in Glastonbury, England. A special person named Patricia would introduce me to him, explaining that bringing awareness to our spiritual condition in the West was his ultimate goal. At a special birthday a special friend's birthday party in August 2005, a group of illustrious Glastonburians gathered in a lush English garden where I was relieved to be after leading a taxing tour of women artists. I left the garden to move back into the living room and was suddenly stunned by an amazing sight. Looking as if he had come out of a remote cave after years of meditation, an ancient sage with silver hair had entered the room. In an Indian sadhu outfit, long white shirt over pants, his small gray goatee accentuated a face etched with centuries of arduous wisdom. But in reality, it was actually Patricia, who I hadn't yet met, who would become my mentor for Meherabad. She arrived wearing a white blouse with a scalloped top and flowered skirt, an attractive silver belt at her waist. As the strange double vision of a sadhu overlapping her being was beyond anything I could have imagined, my mind blanked out. Turning abruptly away, I spun back into the festivities in the garden and took a breath of fresh air. But in that instant, a signal had been made. How could I have known my life would be changed in such a dramatic fashion? Like the first glimpse of Meherabad in Boston, I didn't put another thought to it. But with Patricia's face and outfit shape-shifting in this way, I had been put on notice that the invisible world would soon become an indelible part of my reality. At an afternoon tea a week after the birthday in the same living room where the sadhu appeared, Patricia gently described Meherabad, recounting her unbelievable experiences of how he had come to her. That was when I innocently said, "Now I do remember seeing a picture of him in 1967 in an apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with no idea this would mark the beginning of my extraordinary journey with him." That was when she invited me to a gathering she would host a week later at her home to do watercolor painting on silk, make flower essences in her garden, and enjoy a healthy meal. Perhaps intuiting a sea change in my life, I was strangely resistant, and late Friday night before that Saturday called to say I couldn't make it. "You have to come," she said. "Your place has already been arranged." After a difficult summer meeting her and an offer to be at a friend's home overlooking the prominent St. John's Cathedral where I could stay until Christmas, my body began to relax. Feeling a bit like the proverbial phoenix rising from the ashes, I had a stunning dream of St. Francis on my first night there, where I had lost everything, faced a door to the unknown, and then recovered into a new world. I had been ready for this chapter with Patricia and Meherabad. That Saturday morning, my feet felt like lead as I climbed two steep hills, but when I arrived, the group was in the back garden full of colorful flowers and lush apple orchards. The small city of Wells and its cathedral, a stunning view in the far distance. Everyone was in high spirits in the bright sunshine as we proceeded to make flower essences there. "Come with me into the sanctuary," Patricia announced after a sumptuous lunch. "Meherabad would like to give each of you to receive a gift from him." Registering that this would not influence me in the least, I walked into an ambiance of soft pink peace. She turned to me and said, "Would you like to receive your gift now?" and proceeded to tell me, "Meherabad would like to give you the largest bouquet of roses you will ever receive." I gasped. Chills went through my body because 9 months before, at the end of a reading with a spiritual intuitive in Glastonbury, I had been told, "Whenever you see a rose, know that those who love you from the other side are sending you their love, are with you, and you will never feel alone." Tears filled my eyes. Here was Baba handing me the largest bouquet of roses I'd ever receive. How did he know? That was it. He just knew. He always knew. Minutes before we sat down in the sanctuary, Patricia had also shown us flower essences taken from plants and trees at Baba's retreat in Meherabad, India, southeast of Mumbai. One of them had been made from the banyan tree, symbolized as the tree of worldly and universal knowledge. I had been very close to a banyan tree that was my makeshift home as a child on Oahu, Hawaii, and those words about the banyan were like another knowing through my body. Resistance was beginning to melt, and it was as if the whole day started to dissolve my strong hesitation towards a sudden connection to the divine. Was this calling linking me to Baba that began with that first sighting of his picture in 1967? And was that because, as had been implied by Patricia, I might have been with him in other lifetimes? It was a great puzzle. I already have a spiritual guide, Paramahansa Yogananda, I thought, with whom I had found comfort for 20 years in Los Angeles. Why do I need another one? Nothing made sense in reaction to this large-scale shift of consciousness that the logical mind couldn't explain. But in weeks following, Patricia invited me to come again to the sanctuary, as Baba wanted to tell me something of my history. Was I interested? Of course I was curious. Through her, he explained that I had been a monk in many lifetimes, and in one particular one had been a Tibetan, where I demonstrated a remarkable devotion to God. Even though I was now living in a different time and culture, that devotion was apparently influencing the fate of my life. Not even sure about the concept of reincarnation, with nothing making sense, there was something about what he said about that personage in Tibet that did. In fact, everything he relayed through Patricia felt instinctively, quote unquote, right to me. Because of this, I was more and more drawn to our connection. Patricia's story was also an impressive one about how Baba became a pivotal part of her life, and that influenced in me as well. Her unsettling appearance as a sadhu and the following events that September made a deeper impression on me. Once a Midland school teacher in England, now with a family of 2 grown children and grandchildren, she had moved with her engineer husband to start a B&B in Glastonbury to develop her spirituality. In the 1990s in Cornwall, she had been told a dream by an invisible presence in white that there would be an article she should read in the newspaper the following morning on Kashmir. She promptly forgot this, but upon awakening, as she turned to 2 full pages on the war-torn area in the newspaper, it described as an ongoing territorial conflict between Pakistan and India. Now she took notice, for in the dream she had heard she was to travel there. This seemed an impossible journey. No travel agents would give insurance to Westerners to go there, and she had never traveled alone without her husband, especially in such dangerous conditions. But somehow, when a last agent finally acquiesced, she knew she must go. She still didn't know who this invisible being was, but soon 2 guests arrived at her door of the B&B who carried a book with Baba's picture on the cover, and she knew it was him. Embarking on the trip to Kashmir with a young, frightened driver over hilly mountain terrain, they were stopped at the border by an equally agitated guard brandishing a gun. Demanding they get out of the car, they stood frozen for several moments until the guard's superior arrived, admonishing him and waving them on. Finally, in safety at a houseboat, alone with no other tourists because of the civil war, she received special attention for all her needs, and there the image of Meher Baba came to her several times, and through multiple sessions in this seclusion, she was able firsthand to receive his teachings. His 1 million+ followers around the world know him as the avatar for all ages, coming not to teach but to awaken, incarnating before as Buddha, Jesus, Ram, Mohammed, and other sages. But as no one listened before, he made a commitment to take an oath of silence, and from his early 20s he never spoke again, using an alphabet board to communicate It was a great sacrifice for one known to have a beautiful singing and speaking voice. After Patricia heard the image of now ageless Meher Baba in the 90s to relay his teachings in Kashmir, she would guide me and a group of both English and Americans in those concepts. Cautious about anything that didn't make sense, it still took me a long time to make a connection. When the wave of many religious sages arrived from the East in the 1960s to infuse United States culture with different perceptions of faith, it was confusing who might be the right one to learn from, if at all. As if looking for urgently needed water in a desert, I had been on my own quest upon arrival in California in the early 1980s to find a spiritual teacher to speak authentically to me. I had to laugh when I spoke of Meher Baba, and friends would say, "You mean Sai Baba, the one with the hair?" No, as a matter of fact, not. That's how Westerners, especially from the U.S., still differentiated between the complexities of these many masters from India and elsewhere, so many as they were quick to point out who were called Baba, meaning father in many languages. In 1982, I discovered Paramahansa Yogananda, who has greatly influenced the West, especially in California and Arizona, where he created a number of temples. Instructed by his master, Sri Yukteswar, to leave India to bring Kriya Yoga to the West in the 1920s, he knew not a word of English, became amazingly fluent in a short period, and was easily accepted by spiritual peoples at that time. The day I walked into the Lake Shrine in Los Angeles and its court of all religions with signs that stated, "We are all one," I found a home base from 1984 to this defining moment in Glastonbury in 2005. And when Meher Baba claimed in 2005 that I would play a part with many others in helping people to awaken to their spirituality who had come to me for this awakening, it felt strangely accurate. And now I have facilitated many in the last 30 years to accept their unique voices and writing and to speak their authentic truths. "You are not who you think you are," Baba has said. "You are much greater than you know." This prediction is for every living person on this planet, most unaware of their tremendous potential, that we are a part of a much larger scope of the universe than we can possibly imagine, only conscious of a small fraction of our place in it, has been a life-changing for me. Many times in my life, I have felt as if, to test my faith, I had been put in a lifeboat to bail out the water. I had to see things to believe them, which Baba knew, because when I saw one reality juxtaposing another in Glastonbury that summer day in August 2005, he knew that was the only way I would accept that there are other realities and his immense presence in the world. To row back up the river is to try to exempt oneself from being acted upon by the forces that so urgently carry us all, not towards safety, but most surely toward salvation. Kimberly C. Patton, a Harvard Divinity chaplain. That's all, folks. This I wrote April 17, 2013, the day I spoke with Rachel, a dear friend and 90-year-old mother figure, and heard her daughter Joan's last words, "Hold on to your intentions." Going on Faith, the St. Francis Dream. One day, the card Faith with the words of Paramahansa Yogananda showed up on my writer's desk. A tattered blue and white square, it had traveled many years with me to distant destinations. It was sitting on top of a pile of papers when I returned after 2 weeks. I had forgotten it was there. In quotes, faith is the intuitive experience of all truth. It is an innate quality of the soul, but in ordinary human beings it is latent. It has to be awakened, nurtured, and brought into full manifestation. which brings conscious contact with one's soul and hence with God. Now, after a colossal windstorm in the Palm Springs desert, the air is milder with sunlit Washingtonia fans, palms softly waving in the distance. I feel the resolve to ask again, what is faith and why am I writing about it? Time is limited. I'm not 40 anymore with a surplus of energy, but the wisdom gained for life experience can't be duplicated. I want to leave a gift to the future that will hopefully see many through the darkness when it also leans upon them. That is the intention I want to hold on to. One of the best gifts to the future I can offer is the story of a once-in-lifetime dream. I was in Glastonbury, England, a pillar of philosophic and religious crossroads for centuries, and I call it the St. Francis dream. It was a dark night, one of firsts, while staying alone at the home of Thelma Moran and 90-year-old crystal healer that overlooks St. John's Cathedral, the largest and most powerful of numerous churches in town. Thelma's back garden of roses and water features faced in 4 tall spires that often turned black and silver in the twilight, which I noted again as I walked up the stairs to the 2nd level. At that level was a large Nicholas Rourke painting of a lean and bedraggled St. Francis in shades of blue. Rourke was a prolific painter and a Russian explorer who was not allowed to leave the Himalayas by the Chinese in the 1930s, thus giving him the opportunity to create several extraordinary views of those mountains and other transcendent landscapes. His body of work has provided some of the most evocative spiritual images ever witnessed. After a wrenching summer, the offer of Thelma's home for 4 months where I could write and teach others was a godsend. I stared at the St. Francis one last time as I paused on the stairs to go into the adjoining room, my head resting toward St. John's. Then the kind of dream I seldom experience anywhere else but in Glastonbury consumed my sleep. I was on a walkway in a modern sanctuary or monastery whose floors and walls curved in arcs that eventually would meet in a circle. In pairs of 2, scholars and philosophers strolled over the immense space, speaking quietly. Some wore habits, others didn't. The walls and floors were composed of new wood with a blonde veneer that lent a peaceful contemporary feel to the rounded dome of the building and its circular walkways. Then all of a sudden, French doors made of the same wood slid open in front of me to the right, to the dark outside, where I could see absolutely nothing. Peering out, I realized, terrified, that I was supposed to go there into this blackness, and then it occurred to me that I also had no shoes on my feet. How could I walk outside, especially into the dark, with no shoes? I was beyond fear. There was no choice, and so I plunged into this abyss. But right after my fall, almost immediately, brown leather sandals materialized, the kind that laced up and around the legs in more ancient times. I slowly wrapped the straps around my legs, put them on, and began to walk forward. Then a faint mid-afternoon sun appeared out of this pitch darkness, and a little market town in France or England, Italy, beckoned. Vendors were selling all sorts of wares, and I stopped at one where a man offered me a bowl of green noodles. As he gave it to me, I told him I had $5 back at the sanctuary monastery from where I had just come from, and could pay him if we went back there. He said that was fine because he happened to be driving there anyway in a short time to take a sickly girl there. When we arrived, we came to the entryway of large sweeping gates that led to the enclosure of the dome structure I had originally departed from. Composed of the same wood that led to the arcing walkways I had seen before, it had large gates to the right or the left, and I knew I was supposed to walk through the right. As I started to enter through it, I looked over and saw the man from the market take the young blonde girl through the gate to the left. I felt in the dream that she must be another part of myself, and with my decision to go through the right gateway instead of the left, it seemed I had reached a significant decision in my life. And so my pilgrim's journey through the terror of pitch darkness and the unknown and back again into the light had ended with the provision of both shoes and food almost immediately. Coincidentally, I had worn a number for years, a pair of favorite sandals, somewhat like those in the dream, that came from the counterculture 70s in New England. And many years later, when I was in a difficult transition, a friend handed me a bowl of green noodles. When I had returned from England in 2004, a year before this dream, to decide whether or not to go back and start a new life there, to continue to teach international women to find their writing voices, I heard a voice say, "Get rid of everything." Rather stunned by this message, I wonder if it had its source in the resolution I made in 1998, right after my mother passed on, that soul evolution was the most important commitment I would now make in my life. Storage for old furniture, artwork, books, and minutiae was cleared and discarded. China and other treasures from family history, special traditional Japanese Hakata dolls, and other precious objects were placed in homes of friends and family. I even sold my car, a contradiction in car-consumed California, but strangely enough felt immensely lighter. Being without shoes and facing the unknown through loss, devastation, or deprivation, faith can invariably come into play. If one can surrender to this condition, it is amazing how often the basic parts of one's life are taken care of by larger outside forces. This is in part what the essence of this St. Francis dream meant to me, and the haunting aftermath of awakening from which it echoed through my being for months afterwards. Who cares if the world is strewn with thorns? Simply put on the sandals and walk over them. The sandals are the knowledge that God alone exists. Ramakrishna. Seeing Baba's hand my last day in India, Meherabad Retreat Center, Ahmednagar, India. Awakening each morning, my first thought was to make the daily pilgrimage to Baba's Samadhi, the white marble tomb where masses of pilgrims came to pay tribute from all over the world. After I rushed through dressing for the 7 a.m. arti, a time of prayer and chants at least a mile away through brush and forest, I'd nod my head silently as I greeted the Indian soldier when I finally left the retreat site. A slight smile on his face, he'd always nod back, impressive in an immaculately pressed brown uniform so different from the jeans, long dresses, scarves, and t-shirts international devotees wore there. On the first day of the retreat, I was stopped just outside the center by the mesmerizing voice of a woman who chanted the Hindu bhajan, her stunning sounds coming from high in the sky. Then, as she made these daily calls to prayer, a man's sonorous tones in a lower pitch, seemingly further down in the air, summoned Muslim men to the mosque, Hindu and Muslim side by side. How could we have lost this evocative voice calling across distances versus the silent technological ones of our times? I wondered every day I would hear them. In a world where our only constant sound is the rubber of tires on the freeways, I felt the Western world's loss of this vivid human voice reaching out over the miles to others. A hooded acacia tree that flung open its wide arms was my next breathtaking stop. Having never seen such an expressive, gesticulating tree like this before, brought home again the startling difference between the Indian subcontinent and the U.S., reminding me how far I was from Los Angeles, almost halfway around the world. In trees as vigorously shaped as the acacia further down the path, green Paris caroused me, and because of the monsoons had lasted longer that year, I was told the temporary oval-shaped lake below would allow the villagers of ancient Aragon to have precious water to drink. What would happen if they didn't have this reprieve? How would they survive, I thought, as white egrets rested on the wet ground near it, fanning their wings in the heat. Then on a pathway of white stones, one stepping stone leading to another, I entered a row of pristine lead trees marking the entryway towards the samadhi. Picking up a red hibiscus from the ground, I'd imagine it growing to giant proportions once at the samadhi's entryway, covering its entrance and expanding out the doorway in huge swirling colors into the sky. At other time, from the same row of flowers, I choose a creamy white hibiscus with a brilliant red stalk that symbolized the purity of Meher Baba's intention of coming, not to teach but to awaken. Imagining it at the samadhi's entrance like the white one, it would also project Baba's intentions out into the world. Perhaps it was these imaginings that triggered a most extraordinary event on the last day, the sudden amazing vision of Meher Baba's hand palmed down over the landscape, like a giant all-encompassing umbrella that not only filled the entire sky and surroundings, but covered the ancient village of Aragon below. It also moved further out into the vast distance. How deeply Baba's inestimable love and protection exists everywhere, I sighed as I felt it and saw it in my mind's eye, particularly aware of its existence when I arrived in the teeming streets of Mumbai that day and the day after in cold, dark London. Having taken the vow of silence to emphasize his intention not to teach but to awaken, since when he came before in other incarnations, no one hesitated, he made the commitment not to speak in the last years of his life. First using an alphabet board pointing to letters that would make up words the mandalay his male disciples would translate, he later gesticulated with his fingers and facial expressions that were easy to understand with his animated presence. This vow of silence for the rest of his life was a clear signal to the world and his devotees that what is given and received in silence is the most significant transmission of spirit. The last day, I was also honored to choose one of the large cloths that had been sewn to lay on the tomb for just a day. Ushered into a small cabin where all the precious cloths were stacked, I was given just a few minutes to decide which one I would take permanently back to the West as a keepsake. A hard choice, but I knew immediately to select a deep red cloth with light green, intricately embroidered flowers. Its strong red vibration drew me, and I carried it carefully to the site where the crowd was still gathered at the arty. My suitcase standing in the hallway of the larger building where I'd meet Patricia, my Baba mentor, and the driver, I held this precious possession in my arms as the group sang "Happy Trails" and tried not to cry. As I stare at the cloth now, years later, I see even more clearly the light filigree of delicate strokes used to sew the chartreuse flowers. They almost float over its surface like bulbous discs intricately described onto the material in a richness of color interlaced with devotion and spirit I continue to feel from the trip. Back in California, a mile and times away, I am reminded with irrevocable certainty that Baba exists everywhere in vast silence. Bowled over as I was to witness the sight of his hand on my last day in its incomprehensible essence, I'm still thrilled to know it was there and exists for all time and eternity. And then there's this poem. Blue mist of the valley. Dawn has arrived in transparent shades across the sky as the rat-a-tat-tat of fireworks in the distance still celebrate Diwali, the festival of lights for Krishna. Pilgrims on their way to Baba's Samadhi shrine move in a blue mist, turning to gray, blackened by smog and heat over the landscape, as the sun, yellow-white in a faint orca shadow, starts to succumb to the larger gray clouds, becoming a white flaming dot, like Meherabad, a singular white sun that guides us all on. Blue mists of the valley, like prayers, rise in the air, as the female voice, also like mist, recites bhajans. Voices call here across distances in a way I've never heard before. The call to mystery, the call to prayer, the call to connection. Kite-shaped green birds glide through trees, furling their wings, and the omnipresent smoky voice of the train announces its slithering movement through this landscape of mist. Beloved silence, you have swept me into your net.